Hello and welcome. Today I am joined by Tracy McAdam, physiotherapist based up in Scotland. So Tracy, thank you for joining.
No, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
No problem. So obviously tell by your accent, you've got a Scottish accent. I'm presuming you're from there originally.
Yeah, I'm originally from Edinburgh. Still based out of Edinburgh, even though my roles is one of travelling a lot at the moment. But yes, I studied in Edinburgh, qualified in Edinburgh, started my career in the NHS in Edinburgh, and yes, still very much based here. As I kind of outsource myself to everything that I do, I guess. Yeah.
So what made you want to go into this line of work then?
Yeah, I mean, when I was younger, I was actually really keen ballet dancer, and that's what I wanted to do actually as a job. And my very wise mother said that she really wanted me to continue doing it, but she wanted me to have other options. So I'd looked at career paths in which I could maybe continue in that kind of sporting or arts area. While doing both together. And I came across a physiotherapist that was part of our dance company. And that's when I decided I'd be really interested in maybe having that kind of role. So that's how I decided to take an interest in physio. Which was great. And in fact, my first position when I graduated was I'd gone out and did my last placement with the Melbourne Ballet School. But when I returned back to Scotland, there wasn't as many opportunities in the kind of arts field. So that took me down the path of sport. So that's how I ended up there.
Yeah. Interesting. You said ballet and not belly then, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. That's correct. It's the accent. A lot of people are like, "You're a belly dancer." I was like, no, I was a ballet dancer.
Well, dance medicine seems to have really, that seems to be so much investment in that. Like, a friend of mine works at the Peabody Institute at Johns Hopkins Hospital, and I've been to McAdam's in Helsinki and in Hong Kong over the last few years, and the investment seems to be massive in that performance medicine, like the performing arts area.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly when I qualified, well, I've been a physio for 17 years now. When I first qualified, there was not really any big operations where you could go and work in that field. At that point, Scottish Ballet had actually lost a lot of funding, but actually that's growing a lot now. And a colleague of mine is just taken on a position which is full time. With the ballet company, and there's way more opportunities in that kind of art field. And I've also got another colleague, Nicola, who hugely inspirational in my career, I would say, and she's working out in America doing Cirque du Soleil. So there's lots of different opportunities now if people are interested in that side of things, which I think is really exciting because these are still very athletic individuals doing very risky things, and there's definitely a need for physios to be part of that. So it's really encouraging to see that's going in that direction, which is wonderful, really.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I think the next one's actually in Ireland this year.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I think the conference, I think it might be Cork or somewhere anyway. It's not Dublin, I know that. But I know some of the Americans are coming over. No, it's amazing. So did you ever think you were going to go into that field of actually working as a physio in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I still very much when I returned from Australia, I still was still dancing and I was still teaching, but the opportunities just weren't there. And that's when I decided, okay, well, I'll go down the sporting route because I loved MSK, but I really wanted to be part of, that team ethos. Which, I did most of my junior training within the NHS, which, again, I would never discourage anyone from. I got the best base. I met some of the best clinicians, but I really wanted to be part of a kind of like team whereby I was sort of like inbuilt into the whole kind of the outcome of what was going to be either like a show or a game. So particularly in Scotland, the easiest way to do that was to go into rugby. Which, Scotland were definitely a bit mad for our rugby as well, which is great. So I then, on the side, while working in the NHS, I took on a club rugby role with my home team, which is Curry Rugby. I did say to the boys, I had to give them a shout out. And I still am very involved there. So I'm like 17 years and, it just seems like home. And along the way, because I was trying to expose myself to so much, other sports. I took on an academy role at Hearts football, so I was getting experience with the professional setup with football, and then on top of that took on the Scottish hockey role as well, so that I was exposing myself to as many of those kind of more accessible team sports, which could, you know, elevate my career. So those definitely in Edinburgh, particularly most of the private schools very much focus on hockey and rugby. So it made sense to try and be involved in those in order to kind of progress into a full-time role within sports. So that was my kind of thinking about it, which worked really well for me, I guess.
So is that something that you were doing whilst you were doing the degree itself then? Were you always sort of thinking ahead?
Yes, while I was doing my degree, I joined a club rugby team to shadow and volunteer, which I did for 2 years while I was training, so that when I qualified, you know, I could do soft tissue stuff, I could strap, I could cover games, I had my pitch side, just because I was so keen to try and get into these things quite quickly once I qualified. So I certainly would say to any students out there, get up to your local football club or rugby club and, you know, look at what your local physio does. Like, you learn so much from them, and you learn your real, you know, bread and butter up there. So certainly it worked really well for me, and also I enjoyed it. I loved it. So yeah, I would definitely encourage that for anyone, really.
Yeah. Yeah, then to go back to the Australian piece then. So how was that then? How long were you over there for?
So I was over there for about 6 months. I decided I wanted to do my elective placement, and you were allowed to do it abroad. And I had family in Australia, in Melbourne, and you know, I knew somebody that had a link with the ballet school. So the clinic that I worked with, I did some private practice and some with the dance school, which was amazing. They had an amazing setup in the kind of performance arts school there. It's a massive establishment, so that was great. And then on top of that, covered, you know, the local university rugby team, which was great. But I am a bit of a home bird, and so I like to be close to my mum, and I felt like it was just so far away that I wanted to kind of establish my reputation in the UK. So I came back after about 6 months to see what I could build here. And I'm glad I did, because I've had some amazing opportunities. I really have.
Yeah. And did you feel like you could get the experience of, because you were studying and working over there as well, did you get like I backpacked when I was after uni and stuff, but did you get like a full experience, you thought, of Australia, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, everybody that probably knows me and's worked with me definitely knows I'm not a backpacker. I mean, yeah, there's far too many beauty products that get taken on every trip. But yeah, I mean, it was great to see Australia, and obviously Australia is an amazing place for sport. It puts such an emphasis on health and well-being that, you know, the accessibility to be involved in sport is massive, which, you know, was great for me, because there were so many places that wanted physios and needed physios that it was a great place to be to build on that. So yeah, it was great. I enjoyed every minute of it. Yeah.
And did you like see any differences between like the Aussie physios compared to like, the British way of doing things?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my perspective, because a lot of my experience before then had been NHS, you know, there was much more of an emphasis on the hands-on approach in Australia. So a lot of manual therapy. They were also very much more into electrotherapy, which was something I hadn't used as much of at that point. So they used a lot of electrotherapy, and they were just very good at the return to play aspects, which again I hadn't had a lot of exposure to with being in the NHS, because, you know, the majority of the patients that you were seeing maybe weren't returning to a contact sport or you know, a sport at all. So certainly they were very good and efficient at being able to return people to sporting activities, which was really good to learn from the clinicians I was working with out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure it was good. So when you came back and you'd done all those different experiences in football, rugby, and in hockey, so like, what was your plan then? Were they all? I presume they were all like part time along
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the one thing about physio, is that while you're learning your trades, you have to expose yourself to everything you possibly can, because you just don't know what that might open up to. And so I worked with all those different club teams, and that was at the point that I decided that I really need a master's, and a master's in sports physio, because that seemed to be what defined me from other people, to get into these, like, full-time sports roles. So I was when I did my research, I ended up doing my master's at Cardiff under Nikki Phillips, who again, an amazing clinician who was so encouraging. And that was the year whereby it was the Olympics in London. And so that was my first sort of like big games experience, where I got one of the voluntary roles there, and I was field of play for fencing at that point. So that was really, once I'd done the kind of Olympics, I thought, right, I'm going to do everything I can to get into full-time sport. Like, this is what I want to do. And then that's really when I started to throw myself out into the world and try and apply for things and be involved in those things. So yeah, that was the master's was an amazing experience to just network as well, not just educationally, but networking and meeting other physios that had the same goals. Because in the NHS, people's goals and their selections of masters were so different. They were very manual therapy orientated, whereas I definitely wanted to go down the sports route. So it was slightly different, the route that I went down. So yeah, the Olympics really was just, I was like, yeah, like this is what I want to do. I definitely want to be full time in this. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah, what was the atmosphere like in London? Because it was absolutely incredible to watch it.
It was amazing. Like, it was so good. It was a home nation, and in fact, every major games that I've done since has been home nations. So off the back of that, because I was doing Scottish hockey, I had entered into like a sports injury clinic role, which meant that I could do part of my time with the Scottish hockey, which was the women at that point. And that then sort of preceded my selection for Team Scotland for Glasgow. So, I mean, as a physio, to represent your country at a home nations game in Scotland, I mean, I'm not a terribly emotional person, but that was a pretty emotional experience, walking out to a home crowd, in the opening ceremony, and thinking, gosh, I was selected amongst all these people to represent my country. And even though I wasn't good enough as an athlete, I was good enough in my profession. So that was just a crazy experience. And then lucky enough that, with my involvement with the men's Scottish hockey over the last few years, that this evening I get on a flight and I'll be representing Scotland again at Birmingham. So I'm really excited about being able to do that for a second time. Very lucky.
Yeah, no, that is amazing. So how different was it going from like when you were actually affiliated with the team in Glasgow to the work that you'd done in London?
Yeah, I mean, it was so much different. You were so much more involved. You knew your athletes, you'd worked with them. There was a real personal and emotional connection with their success. It was obviously such a grand arena and grand area to work in. And all your work up until that point would have maybe been like in very random, remote places in Europe where you didn't have a lot of support. So to actually then be in major games whereby everything was at your fingertips was amazing. And then being able to see your athletes thrive and in front of a home nation, I mean, it was great. Like the crowds and everything were amazing. It was really, really good experience.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we'll see what Birmingham's like. But
yeah, we'll see.
is there any difference being like Scottish, England, any rivalry from your side on that, or you're not too fussed?
Well, it's very interesting because, my role at the moment is very hybrid all over the place. And I work quite closely with, all the different institutes. And actually, once I come out of the games, I'll be heading straight off with British swimming to cover their Europeans. So, like I know the physios really well there. And, we're very much worked together when we were working for British swimming. And then all of a sudden we're like, right, we're in different camps now. we're against each other now. So it's interesting how we all respond and react to those situations, because I think the things that I would say about all the different nations in the UK is we're very passionate about the countries we come from. So it's really nice to be working with all my colleagues from everywhere. I've also got a colleague who is doing the New Zealand hockey team. So it's so lovely that we've all worked together at some point, and then now we're all representing our countries, but still under the same roof. So it's quite nice.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The British, and then you got for the Commonwealth, it does get split up. It's quite an interesting thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And certainly I think our opening ceremony outfit's the best. So, you can't deny a kilt. So
Oh, is it right? You got kilts, right? Yeah, I've not seen that. Yeah, back again now. That's good. I think the kilt broke the connection.
It probably did.
So you've been doing those work there. You realised in London, like what did you come back to, and like what did you start working on?
Yeah, so I think that so I was working for Edinburgh University in a sports injury clinic, and the role came up there for the head of performance, which is basically a role whereby we look after all the athletes who have got a national pathway. So our Olympians, our Commonwealth Games, athletes that are on a pathway within the SRU or the SHU. I went for that job, and I didn't get it, and I remember being really disappointed about that. And then an advertisement had come up for a fixed term with the Scotland 7 squad, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go for that because I want to be in full-time sport. I went for that job, and I also did not get it. So that was a bit disappointing. But off the back of that interview, they'd phoned me to say, we're not going to give you the sevens job. However, we think that you would be really well suited within Edinburgh Rugby as the rehab physio. And so we want to offer you to come in with the professional team full time. And so I guess then that's the other thing, isn't it? Is apply for everything, interview for everything, because if I hadn't gone for that sevens role, I actually wouldn't have got the job which had the biggest impact on my life, which was working in pro rugby for 7 years. So I went into, after I'd done the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, I started my role full-time with Edinburgh Rugby, which was amazing. I mean, I worked with an amazing head physio who I actually believe you've interviewed before, Stuart Patterson.
Yeah. Got a few tales that he told us that were good ones.
Yeah, he's had a massive influence on my career. So I started there as effectively the junior physio, and you remember him sitting there and saying, right, so what's your goal? Like, is your goal to be the head physio? And I was like, oh no, I'm not good enough to do that. And he was like, no, yeah, you are. Like, let's make sure that we give you exposure to everything, and build your skills. And yeah, so I was there for 7 years. I did all parts of the role. I moved from the rehab role to the team physio role. And then I ended up leading the team for about 12 months while Stu moved on to his national job. But I realised in that head role, I definitely wasn't the right personality. I didn't thrive in a position of management. I like being the team physio. I like being the hands-on physio. I even though I don't shirk away from responsibility, I didn't enjoy the buck landing with me all the time. It's a very stressful environment. And even as a team physio, other people that you have interviewed have said the same. You have to be prepared to work every hour of the day, every weekend, travel all the time. And I loved doing that, but it didn't like the responsibility of being the main decider of those things. So once I'd done that role for about 12 months to backfill Stu, I knew that wasn't my place in the physio world, that I wanted to be like the team physio, and that's what I was good at, and that's what I thrived at. I think in that managerial role, I just really struggled to find my feet in it. And I think that's a really, really good lesson that I learned, was that it's okay to say that role's not for me. It's okay to say, I don't think I'm the head physio or in that kind of professional environment. I'm much better in the team role. And it's okay to decide that's not a failure to go up to that position, to realize that's not for you. So that was at the point where they brought in another head physio that I worked under for a while. But then I really felt like 7 years in professional rugby, it was time to expose myself to something different, because I was comfortable. I could have done that job and not really learn anything new, because it was a comfortable environment for me at that stage. And so as much as it was really scary, that's what I did. I then had a bit of interest from Red Bull, and I went and did some work out in Austria in the performance centre, the Athletes Performance Centre in Austria in Salzburg, and that was looking after extreme sports, which was amazing. I mean, the one thing about Red Bull is that you have all the equipment, everything you could think of, you have to hand, and it was amazing. But then, obviously, then COVID hit, so that made things difficult. And so I had to sort of regroup and think, what am I going to do again? So
just on that one then, so
yeah.
you said you're a home bird, so you're in Austria, we working there, so how did you find that, being away from your mum then?
Yeah, like Austria's very close. It's not that far to get to. It was a few hours. And Salzburg's very like Edinburgh-like, so I would say it's it's relatively the same size. It's full of history. It's very like home. But I think the thing that I struggled with in Austria is they wanted a British physio, and particularly they were looking for a female at that time, because they had a lot of male physios. So they wanted a female that was very who was English speaking, because our athletes that we serviced were from all of Europe. They were from all over the place, really. So the athlete performance centres for Red Bull, there's one in Austria and there's one in LA. So anyone that was closest to Austria, and I think the common denominator was that all nations spoke English, so they wanted somebody that could communicate with all the athletes, and they wanted them that slightly different facet, because a lot of the physios were either Austrian or German. So it was slightly different. It was I think my expectation of working with Red Bull, I didn't know what my expectation is, but we over there, we looked after any athletes. They used to come in for like maybe 2 weeks or 4 weeks. They would be tested, and we'd give them training and rehab programs, and then they would leave and go back to where their hometown was. That then became tricky, because there was no consistency for me. And even though I really enjoyed it, I still thrived in a team environment. So I knew then at that point, when COVID kind of forced me to not be able to travel there, that I wanted to still be part of a team. So again, even though disappointing, it just moved me in a slightly different direction.
Yeah. And then just going back to what you said about the time at Edinburgh, then, in terms of that management, was that year, were you unhappy doing that role then?
Yeah, I was. I would have said that, I found myself very anxious, and I found myself, taking things personally. And again, that's another bit of advice I'd say to young physios going into these big environments, is that, don't take things personally, because the majority of the time, if a coach is frustrated or annoyed about not having a certain player, it's not your fault, but often you're the one that has to have that communication with them. And I think because I felt overwhelmed in that position anyway, I took things personally, and it made me really quite anxious. And that's when I kind of thought, I'm losing the love for this, because I'm in a role that I just feel I'm not thriving in. And you know, at first I thought, "Oh, if I decide I don't want to do this role anymore, are people going to think I'm a failure?" And you know, I was hanging on to that role a little bit because I kind of was worried about what other people would think of me and what other people would think about, you know, the role that I stepped back from. But actually, it was the best thing for me, because then I went back into a team role and I started to enjoy it again. So it was a positive experience to have.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's always good to find something that you just think you don't want to be unhappy, do you? Doing whatever you're doing.
No,
There's no
exactly.
point. Any of these roles, I mean, one of the things that I find it all really interesting, these areas, but do you ever get any support through it, like the degree or when you're working in physio about what role best suits you? So in terms of like personality tests or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, like towards the latter stage, they would do like, you know, the analysis, which then would show if you were like a red or a yellow or a blue or a green. And I certainly came out as very much like that yellow role. So like, you know, the sympathetic one, the caring one, you know, the very contemplative one. And that would have been one of the things that I would have said that people picked up on, is that they used to always say, have an opinion in these team meetings. But my physio mind's very much like taking the information, go away and think about it, and then come back with a response. But certainly in some of those roles, those high pressure roles, they see it as you not having an opinion. And it's not that, it's just the way that my personality and my brain works, is that I like to take in the information, have a think about it, and then have an opinion on it. So sometimes it could be seen as though you were sitting on the fence, but actually I think it's more my personality that's how I work best. So yeah.
And that, what do you think is a normal character trait of people that you've worked with them?
I think that head physios, in rugby particularly, I think would come out as reds. Yeah, I definitely think they'd be a red behaviour, and I'm pretty sure Stu was a red. Yeah, I think Stu was a red. He can correct me if he sees this. So yeah, definitely your heads are more kind of reds, and I think that your teams are more yellows.
And then what about like the coaching staff and the players? Like, do they have the same sort of things as well?
When I was in the SRU, I don't think the players were ever done, but definitely the physio team, we all did it. And it was really interesting because we had a really good mix. We had a red, a blue, and a yellow. So we were all very, very different. And I think it would be very obvious that I was the yellow, because I think as the female as well, not branching this out to all females, but I definitely went into that kind of mothering role and that sympathetic role, and you know, that caring role. And I think that it's nice to have that balance. It's nice to have a balance of all these different personalities, because you need them all. A team can't function if everybody is the same personality with the same approaches. It needs to be varied. So I think that for us at the time when I was there, we were all very different, and that made it a really successful team.
Yeah, no, definitely makes sense, doesn't it, in terms of the different skill sets. Sometimes you think you should have a certain trait or color or whatever it is that you're doing there. But you mentioned about when you were in Austria then about that they wanted a female physio, and then you just talked about the mothering role, but I know that's separate things. But have you found that there is more of like an emphasis on gender in the roles that you've gone for? Is that a consideration for a lot of places?
I mean, a lot of people will speak about, oh, you're a female in a male dominant environment. I used to struggle with that a little bit, because I was a physio in a male dominant environment. Of course I was. But my role was a physio, and it didn't really matter to me what gender people were. I think we bring different things to the table, and I do think there's differences in the way females approach things and males approach things. And I do sort of see that, yeah, you know, professional sport is definitely more dominated by male physios. But I think a lot of the time it's because they do have those slightly more, maybe aggression is the wrong word, but they're less emotional, they are more direct. And I think in these high pressured environments, that actually that approach is very much needed. So I don't think it's necessarily to do with gender. I think it's to do with just what personalities each gender tends to be. It tends to have. And certainly I've worked with a lot of females in professional rugby, and the SRU was amazing, actually, in the sense of our head physio when I first came in, the head of all of the teams, was Paul McGinley, and he was terribly proud of having a very equal mix of female and male physios, and that was really, really good. He was really he really wanted diversity. So there was lots of female physios within the SRU when I was there, which was really positive. It was great.
Yeah, rugby certainly seems to have more females in than football, from what I've seen anyway, and the people I know. But yeah, no, it's an interesting environment. So then, after when you were in, you left there. So then, what did you go on to do?
So because of COVID, I decided that the head of performance role came up at Edinburgh University again. So I decided that, okay, I'll go for that then, and see if I get that. And I did. So I started the role of head of performance at Edinburgh University, which I still currently run. Because, as I said, I'm a team physio. I like to travel. I like to be part of that. I then was very lucky that a gentleman I used to work with had called me up and said, look, I've got a really exciting opportunity for you, and I'm not sure what you think about it. And that was to go into motorsport, an area I don't know much about, or didn't know very much about. And the role was the head physio for the W Series, which is the women's series, which works alongside Formula One. So we race as a kind of on the F1 circuit. So we do 10 Formula One races. And the mission for the W Series is to develop a female driver to get into the Formula One eventually. So I've been part of W Series now for 2 seasons. And I have to say, motorsport is a very different environment for physios, but very exciting, like a really exciting stage to work on, and a really lovely company whereby we're trying to do something really different, because we've not had a woman in the Formula One for a very long time, and it would be lovely to be part of that, to see one of our girls potentially get into one of those Formula One seats. So that's my role at the moment. So it's very good. It's very different.
So are you working for the governing body then, rather than a team or anything?
No, I am directly employed by W Series, so I don't work. Obviously, we all work under FIA, but I work directly for W Series. But we will maybe be doing. We're going to start doing some research, particularly into female drivers and their comparison with male drivers. Because a lot of the issues that we're finding trying to get a female into an F1 car is the difficulties of progressing them through the ranks, so going into F3 and F2, which are non-power steered cars. It's very difficult at the moment to get enough strength in the females to be able to drive those cars, but the natural progress is going through those to competitions to get to F1. So it's there's so many different facets to us being able to achieve it. But at the moment I oversee 20 female drivers, and all like amazing girls, and it's a really positive environment, and they really do try and encourage the female in motorsport movement, which is becoming more and more. You'll see people like Lewis Hamilton really getting behind female in motorsport in every way: female mechanics, female physios, female engineers, having females a bit more present on the circuit, because probably 10 years ago it would have been fairly rare to have a lot of females in all these different roles. So the series in itself is trying to encourage females of all careers to be involved in motorsport. So we've got a lot of female engineers and mechanics, which is also lovely to see.
Yeah, definitely. No, it is. So what makes the dynamic weird or strange or different in that? driving?
I think the first part that was difficult for me is working with an all-female team. I've only really worked in male teams. So working with females, you have to change your tact ever so slightly. There's different going back to more typical characteristics of a female, dealing with more that emotional side of things, is very much something I've had to learn and manage better, because I didn't have to be involved in that before, because I was working predominantly with men. So that's been difficult. And then also working in a sport I didn't know anything about. So I had to learn all these different things, like about the tires and the cars, and the G forces in these cars, and the demands on their necks and their bodies, which was very unusual to me, because I didn't know anything about single-seater car racing. So.
And what is it like then? Because from an athlete, some people you could look at it and say they're driving a car, comparing that to a rugby player or something else, but obviously that's not the case, and they are athletes. But how do you see that their athletic prowess compared to the other things that you've worked with?
Yeah. I think the thing that's difficult is that there's not a lot of like physical parameter testing that you can do, which will predict that they're going to be the best driver. Certainly in things like rugby, you can assume if they're fitter, they might be better. If they're stronger, they might be better. Those type of things you can be more predictive with. But in a car, it's much more difficult. Of course, they have to be athletic. Of course, they have to be strong. But it's such a skilled sport in the sense of reaction times, concentration, those type of things, which are much more difficult to test as such. So I guess it's less. I find that I can test. There's not a lot I can test that would then predict that female is going to be the better driver. The other thing about motorsport is there's not a lot of research in it. And that's what I hope to influence. So we're just in some conversations now whereby we are going to be testing neck strength in females to try and get some normative data. First of all, we have to start at the bottom. What is normative? What is normal for these drivers? Can we build some sort of research that says this is strong enough or this is not strong enough? And at the moment, we really don't know, because there's nothing out there. And all we can kind of compare it to is we can compare it to other contact sports. But say we look at rugby, the forces are so different. A lot of our issues in the car is the lateral force. So it's very different kind of neck strength that they need. There has been some comparisons drawn with like fighter pilots when it comes to motorsport. But the difficulty in females is there's not a lot of female fighter pilots. So we're going to start from the very bottom, and we're going to look at what's the normative data that we've got on neck strength with our female drivers. And hopefully over the years, we can build on that and get a bit more research around that area, so that we can make the drivers as strong as we can and also as successful as we can. So it's about collecting some data and making some informed decisions, or making sure that we give the girls everything that we can to make them as successful as they can be. So that's going to be my next task within motorsport.
Yeah, no, it sounds exciting. It's great to have a project like that and to be in. Yeah. And what's it like then? So do you interact with the male teams and the F1 teams?
So, I mean, there's not much interaction. It's lovely to see that our F1 drivers are very positive and very encouraging of the female series now. Lewis Hamilton, speaks a lot about the W series. A lot of the F1 teams are starting to bring on female ambassadors. So we've got one of our female drivers, an ambassador for Aston Martin, one for Williams. So a lot of these of the F1 teams are now starting to bring on females as ambassadors, because it's only going to grow. It's only going to get better, and our drivers are only going to get better. because a lot of the problems in motorsport is giving the females exposure to driving a car. You know, they're given 10 races, and out with that, they might never be in a single seater car. It's unlike any other sport. They can't just go out and practice like a rugby player does or a hockey player does. So they don't have as much exposure to their actual sport. And that's something, again, that we need to change. We need to give them better accessibility. And at the moment, we've got 10 races, and I would hope that that's just going to increase so that we can see them progressing and improving, which would be amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then the work that you're doing at the university, then, was it the same panel that you had when you didn't get the job?
Well, the individual that got the job is now my boss.
Oh, right.
So I'm head of performance. We've only just employed another person to come on to performance. I oversee 240 athletes of varying sports. So hockey, rugby, swimming. We do basketball, we do rowing, we do individual performance athletes, which are mainly athletics, but we've got a few rock climbers, because obviously bouldering went into the Olympics. We've got a few rock climbers. So yeah, there's a real mix of sports. And within all those sports, I work with all their governing bodies. So the SHU for hockey, British Athletics for our athletics ones, British Swimming. So I really have to communicate really well with all these different governing bodies while the athletes are doing their education at Edinburgh Uni. So it's a really exciting role. And we've also brought on loads of different testing equipment this year. So we're lucky enough to we have everything at our fingertips, which is amazing. We've got Alter Gs, Biodexes, we've got force frames, force decks, we've got a performance gym, which is specific for the athletes. So we're very well equipped. And when it comes to university sport, even though you might not actually see them perform on the national stage, you know, at some point they will leave the university, and you will see them in Olympic Games and Commonwealth Games. But we've got a lot of Commonwealth athletes going to Birmingham, so that's really good for the university. And I think that to have also their head of performance there doing her job, the university is really proud of everybody's achievements. So it's a lovely place to work. It's a really nice place to work.
Yeah, definitely. No, sounds really exciting. So do you have any sort of plans or things that you'd like to try that you've not done already?
Yeah, I mean, I never say never to go back to professional rugby. I do think I'll go back there eventually. But I felt it was the right time to go and expose myself to other things. Would I want to do some stuff with Formula One? Yeah, I think I would. I think I'd like to get some exposure with the men's racing. Now that I've done the women's, I think that would lead on quite nicely to doing some of the male motorsports. So that's something that might be on my radar. So yeah, who knows what the future will hold. But I mean, 6 months of the year I'm not actually in Scotland, so at the moment it's just about making sure I do the best job I can with all the different things that I'm looking after. So I'm really content at the moment with what I do. I've got really good variety, and I'm involved in some really exciting work. So yeah, I'm pretty content right now.
Yeah, no, sounds it. And then
Yeah.
you mentioned Stu and a couple of other people, but are there any people that you think have had like a really big impact on your career that have been particularly influential?
Yeah, you know, I got asked this not so very long ago. I was doing a talk about females in rugby, actually, and somebody said, "Who is your biggest influence?" I would say my biggest influence is actually a coach, Coach Alan Solomons, who was the head coach at Edinburgh Rugby. I remember when Stu went away to do national team stuff, and I had to step into Stu's role. I really was so nervous, and I didn't know if I was going to do a good job. And you know, Solly was an amazing coach, very encouraging, very supportive. He was just a great coach to work under, and he had a lot of faith in me when I maybe didn't have faith in myself, and that really brought my confidence on. And you know, I remember the first time that I had to lead the game, and I never slept all night. I was so nervous about being responsible for you know, doing the game. And that was the first game that I did, and you know, Solly was just influential and just being like, you're fine, you've done hundreds of games, like, you know, just get out there and do your job. So he was very influential to me, in that, never making me feel like I wasn't in the right place, that I was exactly where I was meant to be. So I would say he was my biggest overall influence in my sporting career. Yeah.
That's great, isn't it? Yeah, definitely good to be surrounded by those sort of people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and then in terms of, you mentioned about the coming out into the Commonwealth Games in Scotland, but are there any other particular things that have been really memorable?
Yeah, I would say probably my first Grand Prix was pretty memorable. You know, the just the sport is people that support Formula One, they just love Formula One. The atmosphere, like my first Grand Prix was in Austria at the Red Bull Ring, and that it was the first time that spectators were allowed. And I remember the fans like blowing orange smoke into the air for like Max Verstappen, and the sky was orange with smoke, and just the atmosphere, you know, the noise of a Grand Prix, the smell of a Grand Prix. I have to say, I was like, you know, really excited to be part of that. So yeah, I would say that was a really memorable time in my career, where I was like, wow, this is cool. And then I guess, you know, my very first professional rugby game, you know, that was so memorable to me. Running on for the first time, I remember, you know, I dropped my radio on the pitch, and, you know, I left my ice bag in the middle of the pitch, and I was in such a, you know, panic about doing it so well. And I always look back and think, it can't get any worse than that. You left half your equipment on the pitch as you ran off, you know. So yeah, so many memorable experiences that that I'm very proud and very lucky to have had. I'm very lucky. Yeah.
Caught up with Julie Hayton, and she said she has had some horrendous stick at games. Have you had much stick when you've been at games?
Yeah, I know Julie Hayton really well. I worked with Julie for quite a while. She came up and helped us at Edinburgh. She's such an amazing female in sport. She's great. Yeah, like you do. And I would say at the beginning of my career, I very much would get offended by things that got shouted at you, or potentially getting really uncomfortable about it. But it's amazing, the more games you do, the more that you don't even hear what anyone's saying. You know, you're so focused on your job. You know, the majority of the time the coach is screaming in your ear, that actually you don't really notice these things. I'm not saying that means that it's any less right if people say hackle the physio, the female physio. And I know there's been a lot of very, public things, particularly with females in football more so. But to me, I'm there to do a job, and I can only be responsible for my own behaviour. I can't be responsible for others. And as long as I do my job well, sometimes it's just about zoning out those things that happen. And like I think that I used to always be very aware of the environment, of course. And it's also about laughing at yourself. I remember getting hit in the face with a ball and the crowd laughing. and it's about, well, okay, yeah, it's quite funny, no point in getting embarrassed, get back to your job. So yeah, I think after a while you just drown it out. It got to the point that my mum would still be shouting for me in the crowd and I wouldn't even have recognized that she was there. So yeah, I think you just drown it out.
Yeah, probably the best way to deal with it as well.
Absolutely. It's the only way.
Yeah. And then last question. So in terms of alongside your work, do you read any books about development or personal development, professional development?
Yeah, I recently did this program. Actually, I'd done a bit of reading around just self-development, and I went on this program called the Aurora program, which is it's actually a female only program, and it's about developing, coping skills for certain situations. It was about analysing female behaviours and characteristics, and what is of a positive influence and what can sometimes be detrimental, and sometimes how to manage difficult situations, which how our traits are best interpreted by other people. So I did this whole program called the Aurora program, and for any female physios out there, actually it wasn't even just for physios, it was for any female. It was a really good program just to kind of develop those skills to think about, okay, what traits have I got? How can I use that to my benefit? What can I change? How can I manage it better? So certainly doing that last year, I think really changed my mindset with a lot of things, but it was a really good program to do as a female, I would say.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Yeah, female only. So is that online then, or in person?
Yeah, well, it usually is in person, actually. It was the university that sourced it for me. It's usually in person, but because of COVID, it was done online, which I think was a bit of a shame, because, you then produced a network group off the back of it, and every female that was in your group did a different job. We had lawyers, we had physios, we had doctors, we had loads of different females and different roles. So it's actually sometimes quite nice to speak to somebody that's not in the medical field to say, I had this situation, I dealt with it like this, would you have done it any differently? Because they can take out of the equation what your actual job is, and they can just look at it by, okay, well, how did you deal with this situation? So I find that hugely beneficial to actually speak to other females in other careers, because sometimes you can gain a lot of insight into how to better manage things no matter what you do.
Yeah, no, definitely agree. No, it's good. It's always good to be pushing it and developing different things. But Tracy, really appreciate. I know you've got to get ready to go to Birmingham, so thank you for sharing your time. Really appreciate it. Have a safe flight, and hope it all goes well. And thanks for your time.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks very much.
Bye. Bye.